Africa is a massive continent, lush with varying wildlife and unique cultures. As with any part of the world, though, terrors may lurk around the occasional corner. Today, let's dive into the allegedly true scary stories people have to share from Africa. If you want a chance to have your story featured on the show, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear some stories from Yellowstone National Park, or stories about fishing, lakes, and rivers. Also, follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on iTunes and Spotify, and leave a review on iTunes too if you can, to support us. Thanks so much. Now, let's begin. Warning: the following story contains violence between animals and humans. In Africa, ghosts are your last concern. From Milton F. I worked for years as an anti-poaching ranger, ecologist, and field guide throughout Africa. From guiding in Kruger National Park to tranquilizing elephants near Mount Kilimanjaro, and leading anti-poaching patrols in the Okavango Delta of Angola, I've seen and done a lot. I've seen infinite amounts of beauty and good, but also my share of civil unrest, war, murder, firefights, animal attacks, wildfires, and more. Despite all of the things I have experienced, one of the creatures that unsettled me the most during my time in the bush was the leopard, and the following is why. Near the beginning of my career, I worked in a large national park in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. The foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains began here and climbed until you reached the border of Lesotho to the west. The park teemed with wildlife, elephants, rhinos, African painted wolves, and more. But in the shadows and canopies of the foothills and lowlands, the elusive leopard prowled. Stories about these big cats were pounded into our head in training and by older guides. Never make eye contact with one, or you'll be dead before you know what you saw. Or you're right screwed if one gets you. They dig their claws into your stomach and rip out your guts. That is, if they didn't come up behind you and get you by the neck. So, needless to say, those of us working in the remote bush always kept our eyes peeled, ears focused, and rifles loaded. I remember few things more terrifying than walking through dense forests at night, waiting to catch two eyes in your flashlight's shine, staring down at you and your patrol. I never ended up on the business side of a leopard, but I searched for two who did. The area's biggest industry was tourism. Every year, thousands, likely hundreds of thousands or more, streamed into the parks hoping to capture photos, memories, and knickknacks. As a result, many people became guides, hoping to find their fortune taking these high-paying folks on expensive trips. One of these men was an Afrikaner by the name of Axel. He was a goofy but friendly enough fellow who would cruise around in his 1980s Toyota Land Cruiser, packed with tourists. However, he was notorious for breaking the rules. He would drive off trail, getting closer to the animals than was permitted, and he had a terrible addiction to tobacco, which pushed him to light up, even during dry season when the entire park was a bloody tinderbox. Given my position as a ranger and ecologist at the time, I had many interactions with Axel, mostly revolving around his misconduct. Despite this, I liked the guy. His personality was great, and you could always rely on him for a cigarette and a light from his black Zippo lighter. During the wet season, a deep and narrow creek cascades down from the foothills and flows into one of the park's largest wetland areas. About a mile from the wetland, a large concrete and iron bridge offers transport over the creek's raging waters. It was dry season when Axel parked his tourist-filled Land Cruiser on the bridge, so the creek bed was cracked and bone dry. He let his passengers out as the view from the bridge to the wetland was phenomenal. He told them to stay put as he went to take a leak. He walked over to the far side of the bridge and disappeared under the spot where the bridge connected to the top of the berm that slowly sloped 30 feet down to the bottom of the creek bed. The tourists watched him go, then resumed snapping pictures toward the wetland. Suddenly, the call of a gray lory echoed out. The gray lory is more commonly known as the gray go-away bird, as its call sounds like someone yelling, "Go away." Whenever us rangers heard that call, we would instantly be on high alert, as we knew the lory sensed a predator afoot. Immediately after the lory's call, the sound of thrashing brush and a muffled scream echoed from the creek. Several tourists darted over to the other side of the bridge in time to see a massive leopard bound out from under the bridge, carrying Axel's body by the neck. The gray lory continued to cry, "Go away," as the leopard and Axel vanished into the dense brush. We arrived an hour after the tourists called for help and took the eyewitness accounts. We then packed our rucks and loaded our rifles to track down the leopard and the guide's body. The first thing we found was a pack of cigarettes and the black Zippo lighter that scattered on the ground just under the bridge. He hadn't gone under to urinate, but rather to light up out of sight, as the act was illegal this time of year. His last act of rule breaking killed him. We followed the blood down to the creek bed, where we found a dirty boonie cap. 100 meters later, we found a shoe. Soon the blood trail vanished, as did the leopard's tracks. The search lasted almost 2 weeks before it was scaled back and then shut down. Axel was never found. Almost exactly 1 year after Axel met his fate, I was working on a large reserve in Botswana. The park's biodiversity attracted great numbers of visitors every year, many of whom spent the nights in luxury lodges and resorts tucked along the park's borders. Those of us who spent our nights in tents waiting in ambushes for poachers or monitoring the movement of nocturnal species with infrared binoculars understood the extreme danger that the African bush conceals. Many of the visitors didn't. I had just used Axel's Zippo, I still have it today, to light a braai fire, when the radio crackled to life, telling our team to report for a search and rescue to a nearby luxury lodge. We begrudgingly packed away the meat and veggies we'd intended to cook, and drove the 20 minutes to the lodge. Outside the lodge, a father and mother cried, attempting to console each other in between gut-wrenching sobs. 2 children sat next to each other on the lodge's steps, staring off into the night like they had just come back from the front lines. The other guests were gathered on the steps of their own little yurts, talking slowly amongst each other. As we dismounted the pickup, the night guard walked over to us, his face tight and grim.
"Leopard got their daughter,"
he stated in a thick Zulu accent.
"We told him not to sleep on balcony."
We climbed to the balcony and found a tattered hammock with a massive trail of blood leading off the edge and into the trees. A teenage tourist on vacation from Europe with her family had slept on the open-air balcony of the lodge they'd rented. At night, as the night guard had warned them, a leopard slipped into the camp, climbed a nearby tree onto the lodge's roof, and snatched the young girl in her sleep. Unlike Axel, we found her several hours later, stuffed into a large hole about 7 feet up in a tree. That night we shot the leopard dead, as it is standard procedure when such an animal begins preying on humans. I've witnessed paranormal events, moody magic, ethnic cleansing, hippo attacks, but nothing disturbed me more than seeing people getting snatched up by predators, never to be seen or heard from again. To this day, when I'm hiking the woods of the United States, going for a late-night run, or taking my dog out to the bathroom, I keep my eyes and lights on the trees and bush, and a hand on a loaded pistol. They thought I couldn't understand them. From Anonymous. This happened when I was 16. My parents immigrated to the US years before I was born, and like many kids that grow away from their culture, I was very Americanized. My parents are both Somali. I was at the phase in my life where I rebelled. I began drinking, smoking, sneaking out at night. Huge no-nos in Somali and Muslim culture in general. After a few months of being a bad kid, my parents decided to send me back to Africa so I could regain my cultural roots and hopefully stop rebelling against them. There's a huge Somali population in Ethiopia because of borderlines and stolen land. A whole other topic. My parents were raised in the outskirts of Ethiopia, and that's where they sent me for 6 months. I landed in the capital, Addis Ababa, early in the morning, and felt at peace. Addis is a beautiful city, and it looked really modern. I was dreading going to the rural part of Ethiopia. I converted my money to the Ethiopian currency and hailed a cab. The plan was for me to spend one night in a 5-star hotel, and my uncle and aunt would pick me up the following morning. I was alone in a completely new continent, so I was already terrified. But I felt like since I was staying at a nice hotel in the nice part of the city, I would be fine. My father has some Arab lineage, and that passed down to me heavily. I'm the only light skin in my immediate family, and no one thinks I'm black by looking at me. I get mistaken for Arab Armenian and such all the time. Little did I know this would end up saving my life. So I get to the hotel. It's a big skyscraper, absolutely stunning. It looked better than some American hotels I've seen, so a lot of my nerves went away. When I walk into the lobby, there's a very handsome man at the reception desk. Ethiopians and Somalis have very similar features, so at the time I just assumed he was Ethiopian, since I was in Ethiopia. If I would have spoken to him in Somali, assuming he was Somali himself, I would probably be dead right now. He's very nice and speaks good English. We were bantering back and forth, and he's saying how he knows I'm American, because Americans all walk like we're being rushed, things like that. He then asks me how old I am, and I automatically say 21. I had a fake ID back home that I would use to buy liquor and such, so that was always my default age. After talking a bit more, he hands me my key and I go upstairs via the elevator. After settling a bit, I get a sudden rush of thirst. It almost took over my body. I had noticed a vending machine in the lobby, so I decided to go down and buy myself something. The way the lobby was set up was that the reception desk faced the door, and there was a huge lobby with a seating area and an open bar-style restaurant behind the desk. The vending machine was kind of tucked into a corner of the lobby. It was close to the desk, but the only way someone at the reception desk could see someone at the vending machine was if they turned completely around. I take the stairs down and make my way to the vending machine. I see the man at the front desk get up and walk into the side room that was right next to the desk, which I'm guessing was their break area. The door he entered through had locked behind him, but there was another door to the break room on the opposite wall. It was right next to the vending machine. As I'm contemplating on what drink I should get, many foreign options I wanted to try, a busboy from the restaurant walks past me and enters the break room through the door I'm close to. I then hear a voice say in Somali,
"Is that the Arab girl you were talking about?"
My ears perked up and I began to listen. The reception man replied and said,
"Yeah, she's so sexy. I can't wait to do her."
I didn't even think the reception guy saw me when I had went downstairs to the vending machine. He would have had to turn his whole body, and I didn't even notice he was staring at me as I was thinking about what to get. My mouth drops as soon as I hear that. The other man replies and goes,
"These dumb Arab girls think they're safe traveling alone. Give me a room key for the night. If she screams, I'll slit her throat."
As soon as he says that, he walks out of the break room and back into the restaurant. The reception man goes back to his desk, and he calls out to me in English, "You need help with that machine? It's difficult to understand." I couldn't look at him. My hands were shaking. I shook my head no. I bought an orange Fanta and ran back up the stairs to my room. I grabbed my bags and took the elevator back downstairs. As I passed by the reception desk, the man starts shouting and asking me where I'm going. I turn back to him and say in Somali, "I am Somali and I understood everything you and that man said." Without giving him time to react, I ran the heck out of there. I was crying by then. I kept turning to see if the man was following me, but he wasn't. Luckily, the area was downtown, so I entered a restaurant that was Somali-owned about 5 blocks away. I told the owner everything. She and her husband were so sweet. She called the police, who didn't do anything, and let me call my uncle and aunt on her phone. The wife then let me sleep in their apartment on top of the restaurant. They were strangers as well, but she reminded me a lot of my mom, and she even knew my aunt and uncle and spoke to them on the phone as well, which is good. The next 6 months were heaven compared to that. So, reception man and busboy, let's not meet ever again. You're the reason I can't stay at any hotel by myself. Was It A Supernatural Canid? From RJ Timberwolf. The following story is not my own. My father told this to me in his later years, after we had moved away from that area. And even after all those years, about 4 years later, you could see in his eyes that it troubled him, which was saying a lot as he was not known to show fear. The incident occurred in a province called Gauteng in South Africa. The year was 1995, and my father was working on a mine as a detective. His duties included security patrols on mine property and surrounding areas. He was part of a rotational shift, thus there were times he had to work at night. One night he was out on patrol on the back roads, which primarily consisted of dirt roads, when he came upon a canid creature. It had a long snout, similar to a wolf. Its back was slightly sloped like a hyena's. Its long, dark fur seemed to be thick, and it had even darker stripes. It reminded him of a brown hyena, but with stripes and a slightly longer snout. He was driving a company-owned Toyota Hilux at the time. He told me that the canid stood quadrupedal, not bipedal, as high as the pickup. The vehicle model back then was 1.7 meters high at the roof. From research, I deduced that the average shoulder height of a brown hyena is about 28 to 31 inches, with the striped hyena being smaller. Thus, this creature was abnormally large. It stood in the middle of the road, and when the light beams of the pickup shone on it, it turned its head and just stared at him. The creature's eyes reflected red in the light. As far as I know, hyena eyes reflect yellow. The canid was properly illuminated in the headlights, and my father and it stared at each other for what seemed like ages. It never moved. Mostly animals scamper when a motorized vehicle approaches, but this thing, it seemed unafraid. My father felt uneasy at its gaze and sensed that this creature had no intention of moving out of the way. He backed up, and until he turned away, he could see by the reflection of the creature's eyes that it had not budged. It should also be noted that unlike what some people might think, large wild animals don't roam in developed areas in South Africa. If it happens, it is a spectacle to residents. You might find rabbits, snakes, and the occasional jackal on agricultural farms, but that's about it. Brown hyenas in our area was completely unheard of. But when you put the logical approach aside, there may be something else. South Africa is home to a great diversity of ethnic cultures. A belief amongst some of them is that witches or sorcerers have animal familiars that do their bidding and will often be the instrument in performing their evil deeds, such as stealing someone's possessions or even killing animals and humans. These familiars might be corporeal beings or spirits conjured up, depending on which culture you listen to. I am familiar with stories of the hellhound, Barghest, and other supernatural black dogs from Western cultures, which leads me to wonder if this was some sort of familiar or supernatural canid. A nurse ghost in South Africa. From Supermadsr. This is a story from my mom, who is no longer here with us, but I heard it so many times. Many years ago, my mom was working in a hospital called the Old Queen Victoria in Hillbrow, South Africa. Sadly, this hospital has since closed down. My mom was a midwife at the time, but also a pediatric nurse. Those from South Africa may think of Hillbrow as a dangerous place, but during this time it was a wonderful place to stay, and in this hospital many of our nurses were trained. One night while she was on duty, they had many sick babies, but one baby was really sick. The station where they sat during in between times was at the start of the ward, so in order for anyone to come into the ward, they had to pass by there. This night it was a really busy night, and one of the really sick babies was crying a lot, and it had a bad fever. In those days, they would take off all the child's clothes, except the nappy, put on a fan and give them a cold bath when they had a fever. They may still do that, but I'm losing track of the story. Anyway, Mom and one other nurse were on duty. This made it hard for them when the baby started to cry. I cannot remember how many patients there were, but the ward was pretty full. Mom and the other nurse went to help a few other babies who were crying, and left the little baby who had a fever with a fan on, without any clothes and just his nappy, alone. Mom and the other nurse worked hard, then suddenly they remembered the baby with the fan on. One does not want to forget such a baby, because they can start getting too cold and get really sick. When they got back to the little baby, his clothes were back on, the fan was off, and the window they opened for fresh air was now closed. Mom asked the other nurse if she had done it. She replied no. So there was a ghost that somehow came in undetected and dressed the little baby. Mom told me that this was not a once-off. There were other incidences, like finding a baby bottle made for a hungry baby, or a baby being changed, and an extra dirty nappy being in the bucket where they normally put them. Mom also told me how sometimes the door to the ward just opened, or as you ascended the stairs to get to the ward, you would see a ghost-like apparition walking there. Sometimes you would even have the feeling of being bumped into by something as you ascended. Mom said once she went back to day duty, none of this ever took place. So it seemed the old Queen Victoria had a friendly nurse ghost who loved to help the babies at night. Mom and the other nurses were always grateful for its help. I've never been in the building since it closed, so I can't say if the ghost is still there or not. A true story from South Africa. From Larry's essay. I'm a 30-year-old female from South Africa, and I'm a pessimistic person. In South Africa, if you hear something outside, there is a deep-seated fear that you may be assaulted or murdered. We've lived in 2 houses where someone died of old age, and another where someone committed suicide. And no, I've not seen anything supernatural ever. I don't really believe in the ghost or creature concept, as I know how people can lie for attention. Like I said, when you hear something, you grab your dog and you act like a coward and hide. Our country is full of crime. We even have dogs specifically bred for our safety, like the Borbal and Rhodesian Ridgeback. So when you hear something, you call the cops and they show up hours later, if ever. A man got run over across from our house in 2002, and we are still waiting on the police for that one. It's 2020. Anyway, my friend was convinced our new house was haunted, and to prove her wrong in my drunken state, I ordered an EVP recorder from eBay. Weeks later, when I got it, I strapped it to my chest with tape and used my mobile phone to record and walked through the new house, taunting the spirits, and I knew nothing would happen. I walked through the dark house at night, and as expected, nothing happened. I turned off my mobile and went outside. Suddenly, I saw 2 yellow lights in the bathroom window, and since I used to run my girl a bath at night with candles, I thought I didn't blow them out. I went toward the back door to do so, and the 2 candle lights blinked. I realized then that it could not have been candles. I ran to the bedroom and stared at the door the entire night. Since then, my Bauble has been obsessed with one corner of the house, my outdoor flat in particular. Since then, she would jump on my bed, lay on the edge and growl to the corner, with her docked tail tucked between her legs, but still wanting to protect me. One evening, she moved along the bed to the bathroom, growling, and she set on me to prevent me from getting up. My bathroom door was open, and a toothbrush was suddenly launched onto the bed. She immediately grabbed it and bit it, then turned her attention to the bathroom again and growled. I refused to get up and close the door. I fell asleep since I was on heavy medication for PTSD that made me extremely tired and helped with sleep. She kept guard the entire night, and every time I woke up she would lick me. Then she would return to her guarding position. She didn't sleep a wink, and she slept that next day during the day. The following night, I heard 3 knocks at my bedroom door, and she growled. Then I heard another growl at the door. Inhuman, but definitely a growl. My dog sat on me again. The following day, I thought it wouldn't cause harm to apologize for the taunting, and I prayed like never before, telling whatever was in my place never to enter again, in the name of the Lord. Since then, I haven't had any problems in my home, but rather at the sliding door to enter my house. Any advice on how to stop this, and to get my dog her well-deserved sleep, would be appreciated. Thank you. Stalked by a Poacher, Saved by a Lion. From Ilovemydogs. This story comes from my uncle's brother-in-law, so I'll tell it from his point of view. I lived in Nigeria, Africa from 2012 to 2014. One day in April of 2014, I was driving through the wildlife area to make sure no one was poaching or anything like that. I worked as a wildlife officer. I was heading back to town when I stopped my Jeep to clean my bottle of water that spilled. I began to hear footsteps coming right towards me. I then saw a man with a gun staring at me. I waved at him, but he did not reciprocate. I tried to start my Jeep, but it wouldn't start, so I decided to walk on the fenced trail back to town. I grabbed my backpack with my water and snacks in it. I looked back out of curiosity, and I saw the same man following me, so I began to walk a little bit faster. A few seconds later, I noticed a male lion walking past the trees, seemingly keeping pace with me. Even still, the poacher did not leave. I then noticed the lion had a tag on it, meaning it was tracked and protected. As I'm almost to the edge of town, I hear rapid footsteps approaching me from behind. The lion roars and the footsteps stopped. I turned around and the poacher was running off. The lion kept pace with me until I got to town. It watched me from the trail until I was out of sight. The next I heard, the same poacher was caught trying to poach an elephant. Thank God. I never forgot that lion, especially because he had a big scar across his face. I moved back to Cleveland, Ohio in 2015. A few months later, the zoo got a new lion, and lo and behold, it was the same lion who stayed with me on the trail back in Nigeria. I found out his name was Nippa. Nippa went back to Africa in 2017. One of the guys who helped take him back was a fellow wildlife officer from Africa. I asked that he keep me updated on Nippa's condition, and so he sent me letters. Sadly, Nippa died in 2019. When I tell people this story, some are skeptical and others believe it. But I truly believe that Nippa saved my life in April of 2014. I think he protected me from that poacher. When my uncle's brother-in-law tells this story, he cries, believe it or not. Sometimes heroes come in all shapes and sizes.